Welcome to Sound Meets Sound.
Welcome to Sound Meets Sound, Sophie Loizu, aka Anomie. Thank you for joining me here on the internet, all the way from Sydney to California. So far apart, we're in different days.
Hi, Meg. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, I'm coming from the future.
Yeah.
So watch out. I can tell you what's going to happen in the future. No, not really. But
well, it makes sense for like an electronic musician to be able to predict or to like tell the future, to just be in the future.
Feels appropriate, yeah.
So I like to do on this podcast, I'm always really curious about how people start out because our journeys are so different. You know, we all took very different paths. I know in your bio you say you start out saying classically trained, so that intrigued me because I also started out that way. So if you could talk about that for a while, that'd be great.
My journey is, I guess, well, you know, we are a product of our upbringing, and my mother was basically the impetus for everything that's happened in my life, whether she meant to or not. No, I think she really probably did mean to, but she's not around anymore to discuss all of this with, so I do have to spend quite a bit of time wondering what she was thinking when she sent me on this path. But, you know, she enrolled me in music at the age of 4. Wow. Yeah, I was an early starter at school, and so my first recollections of learning piano was being super excited. My piano teacher was very strict, and I was a bit scared of her, but every now and then she'd show a kind of more gentle side, which made me feel at ease, but also at attention. So there was a bit of kind of like, I always felt like going to her was a bit of an auspicious occasion, you know. I had to be on my best behaviour and sit up straight and, you know, hold my hands a certain way and remember all these things that she taught me, and if she didn't, she'd rouse on me a little bit, but not too harshly, but just enough to kind of keep me in line. So I learnt discipline from a very early age, and I think that's something that's really shown to have carried through until now, obviously. You know, having control of my career, being able to kind of get through all the pitfalls and bring myself like, you know, climb out of the big holes that we end up falling into when making art, creating art. Yeah, so I think my mother is really the reason why I'm making music today. She also encouraged me to continue with music. She enrolled me in theory. So I learnt theory from the age of 6. Music theory and piano from, you know, the very formative years has shaped my way of looking at the world and looking at music. I always thought I was bad at maths, and it turns out I'm not, because music and maths are connected, and I wish one of my maths teachers, I wish they had mentioned that to me.
Yeah.
Because I went through my entire childhood and young adulthood thinking I was terrible at math. It's just not true.
It's hard to find a teacher. This happens with music theory too, though, where people are like, I always thought I was bad at music theory because they had a teacher who couldn't really reach them. And I think maths, it's a similar thing where it's a rare teacher that can really reach you, especially, you know, for me, like it was definitely a gendered thing. You have to like convince yourself that you can.
That's it. And going back to my mum for a second, she was also a bit of a, what she called herself, a woman's lib, or she was into women's lib. It was kind of, there wasn't a term feminist used around the house very much, but mum was into women's lib and women's empowerment. And she raised me to be an independent thinker, to question things. She was agnostic/atheist. So all of those aspects of her kind of attitude towards the world rubbed off on me quite heavily. So I did come into quite a lot of contact with teachers in a negative way, in that I would question them and they would get annoyed with me and throw me out of the class. And this happened a lot in maths. Point where I got chucked out of my maths class because I was upset that the maths teacher called us all thick as bricks because we didn't understand. And I just stood up and said, how dare you speak to us like that? You know, you're supposed to be teaching us and you're putting us down. This is no way to be. And basically just throwing some home truths in his general direction. And that was a little too much for the poor guy. And that was the end of my math life at school, which was like, I don't know, I would have been about 14 or 15.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
So, yeah, that was it for math and me.
Teachers like that like belittle their students. I don't, I mean, at a certain point, you're just sad for them because, like, how horrible must your life be if you're looking at all these young faces and you decide to
seeing enemies. Yeah. And I went to an all-girls school as well, so he must have felt really threatened by us somehow.
Oh, yeah, that's another dynamic going on there, especially if you were questioning or not just bowing before him, you know, like giving him the respect.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I was very upset at the fact that I had very little respect for the way he was teaching me, or all of us, really. It was about the way he was speaking to all of us, not just me. I'm an activist, and that started early too. I don't have my mother to blame for that bit. That was my own doing, of my own volition, perhaps a little bit of a push from a great aunt who was very much involved in the anti-nuclear activism campaigns of the late, 80s, I say. Mm-hmm. And meeting her a couple of times in my youth had a huge impact on me and made me ask a lot of questions about the world. And I grew up wanting to be an environmental activist, something that was really important to me. I used to spend my Saturdays out petitioning for the southeast forests, which are still under threat, and a lot of them burnt in the fires recently. I don't know if you've heard about the fires we had here in Australia.
Yeah, I saw you were tweeting and retweeting things about that, and I feel like I've gotten an education about the situation in Australia, especially the fires, but then also just big oil trying to destroy Australia.
They own the government, and so everything that happens here is of their bidding.
Well, that's amazing that started so young. You were standing up for yourself and others from a very, very young age, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was a big thing for me. And I didn't just get it thrown out of math. I got thrown out of the religious classes. I got thrown out of PE. I didn't like the way our PE teachers treated us either. There was a lot of being in the deputy principal's office, and I'm quite proud that the deputy principal called me a social deviant. I didn't know what that meant at the time. So I learnt a couple of new words that day. I was quite pleased with that definition that she ascribed to me. Thanks, Mrs. Seville.
Early on, Sophie was marked as a social deviant. Yeah, when a person like that calls you a social deviant, that's what you want to hear. You don't want to hear.
I know. I'm doing something right.
So I love this thread we're on, but I am curious how you went from classically trained at the piano to electronic music. Was that a direct thing, or was there an intermediary step in there?
Probably a burgeoning class consciousness as well, like learning how to write for an orchestra seemed like a really stupid thing to be doing when you're a working class person. And, kind of coming to the realization that I'll never have access to an orchestra to write the visions I have in my mind, not just because of my class position, but also being a woman and how hard it is, like looking around me and seeing no role model, very few role models being taught to me. I felt really upset about all of that. But at the same time, I discovered through a music teacher at school, this must have been in like the second last or last year of high school, played me a piece by Guy Gross, who I think is a film composer these days, but at the time he was probably also a student studying in one of the universities here, and he wrote a piece called The Dice Waltz, and I don't know if I could ever find this piece again. I've got it on a cassette tape somewhere, but buried in a box. But when I heard it, it was explained to me that this piece was made entirely by computers. But when I listened to it, it sounded like an orchestral piece, and I was just like, what is happening? So that was my first introduction to MIDI and the world of MIDI and electronics. So I came to it with this idea that maybe I could learn how to create orchestral pieces using MIDI and electronic instruments. But then, of course, while that was happening, I also was being cross-pollinated by the rave era happening in the early 90s. there was Technotronic and there was Warp Records. There was Future Sound of London happening, Ninja Tunes, all this really amazing music coming out, electronic music, which was just like, wow, blowing my mind from another angle. I guess there was just this natural kind of crossover that happened in the late 80s, early 90s, where I discovered MIDI and electronics and kind of interested in learning that and maybe studying it. And then also, I guess, the rave era and all of the beautiful peace, love, unity, respect politics that was happening around that electronic music and exciting me in the world of, the warehouses and people and connecting with other humans. And for a long time in my youth, in my teenage life, I was very depressed and angry. I guess, the Gulf War was happening. I was pissed off. I was anti-war. I was environmental activist. And so I was pretty depressed about the way the world was going. But when I discovered rave music and ecstasy, I all of a sudden realised that there was a possibility, like a little bit of hope that maybe humans could come together and solve these issues. And I hadn't felt that before, really, as a young adult. So it really had a huge and massive, significant impact on my life.
It gave you hope for the world and humankind.
Yeah, and also for a future for myself as well. I didn't see, there was a recession happening in Australia at the time. There was massive unemployment, and that's why the rave era kind of took off. The warehouses were empty. People were just breaking into them and throwing these massive warehouse parties. It was quite anarchic.
So, that sort of early 90s technology, what exactly were you using when you started making electronic music?
Okay. So that's an interesting story. I didn't have a computer growing up. My mum had an IBM 286, I think. I remember learning how to word process on and play Castle and Tetris. But I didn't have a computer growing up. So my first computer was an Atari STE. It was running a cracked version of Cubase. I think that was the only thing I could find. And I had a Casio FZ1. Now, that was a full-length keyboard sampler. It had 3 megabytes of RAM, so you could have a floppy in it, and you could load the floppy onto RAM. And then you could do really cool things with it, but it only had a liquid crystal display. Backlight didn't really work, didn't really help. So it was really, really tough going editing samples back in those days. It felt like a massive effort. Which was why when you listen to those Ninja Tune records and Future Sound of London stuff, and you listen to that stuff and you know exactly the kind of equipment they would have been making that stuff on, it just seems mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. How did they do that? Lots of multi-tracking, I imagine, and lots of Casio FZ1s.
I think this is the first time floppy disks have been mentioned on the podcast. I remember those. The big, LP ones and then the smaller ones. Yeah,
these are the little ones, the smaller ones. My first ever synthesizer was a Juno 6 Roland, which got stolen, unfortunately. I got a whole bunch of gear stolen, but I got another one. I was determined not to miss out on my Juno action. It's kind of a staple in my collection. It doesn't have MIDI, and I don't care, but it has got an arpeggiator, which does appeal to me. So the 90s were hugely significant because I also got involved in putting on raves. I got involved a little bit in the politics, the critical mass stuff, which all kind of there was a lot of crossover between those two cultures. Outdoor raves, there was a lot, because, in Australia we have a lot of beautiful outdoor areas, so most of the parties I got involved with were put on outdoors. And that was a really inspiring time, I guess, to get a kind of view of the back end of putting on parties and stuff, which is something I ended up doing quite a lot of later after Red Bull Music Academy. And then I went to university. I studied for 3 years. I studied music tech and composition as a double major, which I had the best time. Honestly, having a positive education experience really does make a big difference in one's life. But it was expensive and I didn't pay it off until a few years ago. Being in debt for that long, it kind of sucks, especially when you're a poor musician.
The idea of putting on a rave outdoors, I can't even imagine the amount of coordination.
And a lot of these outdoor raves had multiple stages as well.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes they didn't even really have proper permission from the authorities, which ended up becoming quite a contentious issue in the end. And, the authorities kind of cracked down on the raves quite hard in the late 90s. And there was a couple of deaths due to different, factors.
Yeah.
Drugs and pushing people out onto the roads after a long night of partying. Yeah, so the cops aren't completely guilt-free, are they ever?
No.
I think, the authoritarian kind of push against rave culture killed rave in the late 90s, and since then it's kind of gone right underground. But it still exists and is alive and well in the inner west in Sydney, and I still love getting involved in the free party scene and love playing at those parties. In fact, I think my favourite party to play at is a free party. It's just the vibe is different, and it's just such a different cross-section of people that show up to a free party. That's my favourite party. Yeah, so that was kind of, when I was in the 90s, I was just a young woman. I looked very young for my age as well. Even in my 30s, I looked quite young. So it was hard for anyone I didn't get any gigs when I was in my 20s, really. It wasn't until Red Bull Music Academy happened that I really started getting opportunities in that area. I used to do some project like the tour managing for Red Bull. After I was a participant for a while, I came back to Sydney all vivacious and excited about what Red Bull Music Academy could do for Australian musicians and Australian artists, and started encouraging everyone to apply. Everyone must apply. But so I did that for almost 7 years, and I put on a lot of tours. I toured people like Gaslamp Killer, Flying Lotus, Theo Parrish, Blue in Exile. They were amazing. Yeah, so many amazing artists from overseas. And that was all thanks to Red Bull Music Academy injecting some culture money into our scene. That kind of dried up a while ago, but it was great for a while. It was a beautiful little thing they did for us here.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what was that like, your 2003 experience? If you feel like we've touched on the 90s enough.
Yeah, for sure.
But I love the 90s. It was a special time. So.
I feel like it's having a resurgence though, Meg.
It is, yeah. It's just funny to see college students, 18-year-olds, listening to Nirvana, Nevermind.
I did that for 2 years while I was unemployed. Every morning I'd wake up and listen to Nevermind, eat muesli for breakfast, wash my hair with this particular conditioner so that whenever I hear Nirvana's Nevermind, I remember the smell of that conditioner.
That's amazing. I love that. But yes.
That's what we do when we're unemployed. Eat muesli, listen to Nirvana.
Oh, man. Yeah, my time in New York City, there are a lot of sense memories there with music. Because especially when you're down on your luck or, you're just struggling, music is sometimes the only thing that keeps you going and getting you up. And you just end up eating things like muesli.
Soy sauce and rice.
Yeah, or dollar slices of pizza for every meal, which is really not good for you.
Oof.
That New York pizza.
Here we have $1 mee goreng.
What is that?
Mee goreng is kind of a noodle dish from Indonesia. Really spicy, yeah. It's a staple for the desperados of us out there.
Yeah, bagels and pizza in New York is what you eat when you don't. But that Indonesian noodle dish sounds a little more hearty than...
Yeah, but if you eat too much of mee goreng, it will kill you. Those little plastic sachets, I don't know.
Oh, man. So yeah. So do you really think of your life in terms of before and after Red Bull? 2003 or?
I mean, talking to you like this, yeah, there is a real clear delineation. No, it's not that much different to the delineation between before and after taking my first ecstasy tablet. Like that little bit of hope, just like a bone gets thrown in your direction, a little tiny slither of hope. Maybe you're not going to have to be on Struggle Street forever. It means so much to us artists, doesn't it?
It does, because we get so little of it.
We get so little. And so, yeah, any kind of like tiny little opportunity, it just, I mean, not that Red Bull wasn't. I mean, this was a massive opportunity. So, yeah, the impact that it had on my life was as big as, being introduced to the rave era in the early 90s. Meeting Robert Moog, getting advice from his wife. She's just basically, I guess if I was to put it into a nutshell, because it was 2003, just, about not giving up, following your passions and your dreams, and, and I guess for them, seeing a lot of people in their lives getting to do that, like Wendy Carlos, for example, and them being kind of getting behind people who aren't necessarily always the kind of stereotypical person that you would see in the limelight. I think just hearing from them that, I have just as much a chance as anyone else at having a stab at it.
Right.
Was really nice. And really validating. Also getting to meet other artists. Like I made a really close contact at RBMA, a guy called David Schnalzny, and he's from Poland, and I always pronounce his surname wrong. So sorry, David, if you're listening to this. David and I started writing music together in this really kind of soft, gentle, experimental, a little bit glitchy, sample-based electronic music together with some lovely vocal contributions from Natalia Grosiak, who is another Polish artist who ended up going to the Red Bull Music Academy. And the three of us collaborated on quite a few tracks, one of which I've released called Millions. That was a self-release out on a record label called Radical Nature, which is my very first record label. I have two now. Basically, I start up a new record label anytime I can't find a record label to put out my record.
Yeah, it can be hard to... record labels, especially in the electronic scene where genres are so multifaceted and there's so many different things. Yeah, I think I totally get that. I've only not done that because I'm too lazy. So,
self-releasing in general is definitely not the domain of the lazy. It is a hard slog, and I know this because I'm right in the middle of a release at the moment. In fact, I've got a release coming out tomorrow. It's called Fat Chance Sucker, and it's a bit of a middle finger to anyone who tries to manipulate you or take you down or act all fascist on your ass. You just say to them, "Fat chance, sucker."
I love that. I'm glad you said it, because I was going to ask, I kind of assumed it was like a general, middle finger to generally fascism. That's great. I love the video too, where you're just sort of fat chance. That's great.
Yeah, it was actually specifically when I wrote it, it was because this guy had done this really horrible thing, which I won't get into because that man does not deserve any airtime.
Right.
But, I had that whole experience in mind. He really hurt a lot of women really badly. And, I just thought, and he tried to crawl back into my life, and I was just like, you know what? Fat chance, sucker. But it's become something I say in my mind anytime someone tries to do something like that,
Right.
Whether it be in the wider world, whether it be at work, if it's a boss thing,
Yeah.
It just works in so many different situations.
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
And I wanted to keep it general for that reason, because everyone's going to have their own reason to say fat chance sucker.
Yeah, it was something I could immediately relate to when I saw the title. I was like, yep, fat chance. Although it sounds better in your accent. Sucker just doesn't sound as good as sucker.
Yeah, but it is an Americanism.
That's true.
Sure, it's an Americanism.
It has to be, yeah.
We are saturated in Americanisms here in Australia, and it's so hard to know
Right.
how they ended up here. But, like, for example, one of the things Australians say, which is really weird, is "I reckon." Do you reckon? We say "I reckon" a lot. I don't even think Americans say that anymore.
It's like an old, or like either it's kind of isolated, like Southern Appalachian type of thing, like "I reckon," but it's not. Yeah, it's not something that we say like in normal. It's something you think of like an old man, like "I reckon back in the day,"
Yeah.
It's so funny. But they say that in England a lot too, don't they?
Do they see? Maybe we got it from them.
Yeah, I have a feeling it was brought over to Appalachia from Britain.
Okay.
So it's a lot of Anyway, it was weird being an American and when I was 18, getting a chance to travel some and like seeing how pervasive the culture was, and just being like, that's really weird. It was a little unsettling to me, just like how pervasive it was in other places.
Yeah. Hollywood has a lot to answer for,
Meg. Yeah, they absolutely do. They really do, yeah.
So much unlearning in my brain has stemmed from things I learnt in Hollywood film.
I mean, same. It's really, it's pretty crazy. Although now Hollywood is, having to bow down to the streaming sites. Yeah. Which I think is a good thing.
Sure.
Anyway, we got way off topic. Yeah, your new release, both the tracks, they're just they're so amazing, and maybe we can get into more about your process and your gear for this release, because people say this about your music all the time. I see the reviews, like the production is just like impeccable. Like it's really amazing, especially as someone who attempts to do this also. It's really amazing how spatial your mixes are.
Oh wow!
Unified also. They're and really powerful. Like it's especially if one has attempted to do these things, like you can really hear like you're nailing it.
So. Oh thanks! Oh wow! I'm so glad that it's coming across like that. In my head it all sounds so different. I mean, I try not to do a lot of A/Bing against other people's music for a reason. I want my mixes to have their own individual production flair. I don't really want to try and kowtow to production tropes.
Yeah.
Although they always end up getting in there, you can't help yourself necessarily, but I try not to consciously do too much of that. I don't want to be over formulaic. I want to be spontaneous as much as possible. I want to leave in some of the errors, not all of them, but just enough to give it a humanity. That's really important to me as a production value. With these two tracks that I'm releasing, Fat Chance Sucker and Bang Bang, I did both of them in a very similar way. I set up my synth so that I could kind of play the lines in live, so that, I was tweaking all the knobs, the frequencies and the resonances and the envelopes and stuff live, and doing full passes through the full track to try and get a sense of it not being... I just wanted it to have a human feel to it. I guess that's really the overarching, because I feel like I haven't done enough of that in my previous tracks. I feel like a lot of my, like from Permanent Revelation, for example, there was so much painstaking production work that went into that to make everything so clean and fresh, and I felt like I wanted to just bring a little bit of dirtiness and nastiness back into my mixes a bit more. Also, I got this really great spring reverb, so I guess, the musical instruments that happen to kind of come into your life at the time sometimes influence your production values as well. Like this Vermona Lancet, which is a spring reverb with a filter in it and an LFO. So sticking some drums through that in Fat Chance Sucker gave it a really nice dirty sound, dirty spring reverb sound.
I know this is like maybe the hardest thing to talk about as an artist, just to put into words, but like, when you're laying down tracks, like what is it that's like inspiring you to, like, in terms of just the actual track, the lines that you write and stuff?
it feels like it's just happening without any effort whatsoever, honestly, Meg. And I think like this is something that's really changed over time. It's a channeling. It feels like a channeling, and I even feel it in my body. It comes from above the top of my head, and it goes down my spine.
Wow.
And so I had this. I remember mentioning about sitting up straight as a kid. Maybe that helps. But I feel this really lovely energy flow through the top of my head when I'm in that zone, and it flows through my spine. And it just goes out my hands, in through my fingers, and everything just seems to happen in that way. And there's not really much thought process going on. It's a very instinctual thing, and I guess that's because I've been doing it a long time. I was 4 when I started playing, so I guess that's it's hard to say even what is intentional and what's instinctual anymore, because it's all happening so naturally. But also I think now that I'm a full-time worker and I don't have as much time to create as I used to when I ran my own studio and worked as a record producer / engineer full-time, that my time is so precious now, and any kind of snippet of time that I get, it's just flowing out of me, it's overflowing, in fact, overwhelmed by this desire to create. So just give me 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 10 hours in the studio, and it will just, it just pours out of me, honestly, Meg. I can't stop it once the faucet is on.
It's amazing how fast time goes by in the studio.
Sure does. There's a sense of timelessness almost sometimes. Yeah. You don't really know whether 5 minutes or 5 hours has passed.
An amazing place to be in as an artist, to just feel it flow through you, and your brain isn't like getting in the way, trying to, process.
No, not during the creative process, Meg. Definitely it kicks in during the engineering production process. So let's just make that clear there.
Oh, yes.
That's all the self-doubt and the misery and the frustration and the anxiety and the anger. Why can't I make it sound like what I want to in my head?
Right.
So there's definitely a layer of, a huge separation between the beautiful instinctual process of creation and then the sorting it all out in the mix afterwards.
Yeah, definitely good to make that clear. Yeah, there's the pure inspiration, and then there's the frustration, and then you listen to it the next day and it sounds completely different to you than how it sounded the previous day, and you don't even know how can I even trust myself.
Yeah, I know, right? And, it's funny, sometimes I think it comes back to that discipline that I learned when I was really young, just staying with it, even when you feel horrible about it. Just stay with it. Yeah. Keep trying and keep nutting through it, because there's so much reward in that process of moving through that stress and that anxiety and finding a peace and solace at the end of it, hopefully. Even sometimes that peace and solace doesn't come until 3 years after it's been released. But it does come. It's the subjective versus the objective, and I think being able to oscillate between those two states is really important as a producer, and finding methods to be able to jump between the two as much as you can. And I like to take breaks now, when I'm conscious of what I'm doing. I like to take breaks and do something else, like watch something on the tubes, or talk to a friend, make something in the kitchen. I love baking. I love gardening. I've got a little balcony. I love making krauts and ferments and things like that. So anything to distract me for a short period of time, and then back into it to get that objective perspective again, So, I think that's really important for the producer, the modern producer especially, like to be able to speed up that objective-subjective switch space. But it's not always that easy, That's the kind of ideal way to do it. But, sometimes there's baggage involved in the way you feel about your song or your track. But also there's that point that you get to where you might, in the midst of a session, you might end up listening to someone else's music for a second and doing a comparison to your own and going,
that's the worst.
I'm doing it all wrong.
Yeah.
Why do we do this to ourselves? Why can we not just let ourselves be who we are and be proud of that? I don't know, but we do have these I do have these horrible periods of self-doubt when I start comparing myself. I think it's just best to try and avoid that. And also being aware that what you're offering is different and unique to what other people are offering, and that is a good thing. We don't need to be all sound alikes. I mean, unless, of course, that's what you're looking for in your career, in which case, go for it.
Right, yeah.
But if you're looking to do something different or find a sound that's unique to you, then, yeah, I think let's try and be kind to ourselves and not overly compare ourselves to other trajectories or careers or sounds or... let's make our own ways and carve our own paths and perhaps provide inspiration to others in doing so. And not to mention the huge amount of therapy that I get, and perhaps you as well, Meg, get from the actual creation process. I mean, it's just brought so much nourishment to my heart and my spirit in times of deep desperation and sadness. I've always had that to go to in times of loneliness and solitude. I've had my music as something to keep me company. You know, there's just so much that it gives me in my life. And even if I wasn't to release anything ever again, I would still make it. There's always going to be a place in my life for this creative process, whether people hear it or not. Although I'd like people to hear it.
Exactly. I was just curious about, it was a couple of years ago now, I think it was Indonesia that you went to. What was that? Can you talk a little bit about that experience? I was just curious.
Oh, yeah. So in 2018, a very good friend of mine, Dan McKinlay, encouraged me to apply for a grant to go to Indonesia with himself and another friend of his, Kieran Ruffles, two fantastic producers in their own right. They've been going to Indonesia quite a lot to collaborate with artists in Bandung, and they wanted me to come along, and I was just like, well, yeah, of course I'd love to. And I felt like I'd been offered this beautiful gift to meet these artists they're working with. They're really interesting artists, Meg, too. One group is a death metal choir called Ensemble Tikoro, which is about 12 a young male and one female singer, and they vocalise death metal sounds with kind of a bent towards the organic, earthy sounds that are inspired by the Sundanese culture and the Sundanese religion, I guess, that exists there. It's not really the most dominant religion anymore, because Muslim culture and Muslim religion is much more dominant. But it still exists, and it's an incredibly rich and historical culture. It's very feminine. They have lots of female deities. The rice goddess culture is alive and well. And yeah, so Ensemble Tikro is one. Mita Kulsum is another artist. She's a Sindan. She is a master singer, has studied for over 10 years. Yeah, just a wealth of incredible artists that we got to meet and work with who are masters in their own rights and wanted to do this cross-cultural kind of experience with us. And we call it Low Techno, and Low Techno is kind of a loose group of collaborators who share musical spirit, and hopefully we're going to release something soon too. That would be really nice. We've got a lot of material coming out. Ensemble Tikaro and Mita Kulsum are, releasing in their own right as well. You can find them on the YouTubes. That's a kind of work in progress at the moment, and something I'm looking forward to spending a bit more time on the latter half of this year. I've also got a film coming out through the Goethe Institute next week. I think that's June the 19th or June the 11th, something like that. I created a sound film, and a sound film is kind of like a film inspired by the sound of a place. So Goethe Institute asked me to create a short film about the sound of Sydney, and so I went off with sound divining rod, which I created out of a stick and a couple of microphones. And I went around Sydney recording sounds and filming those places and creating a little film about it. So that will be coming out very soon. It's called The Sound of X.
Is there anything else upcoming or just in general that you want?
Yes, I've got a vinyl release coming out on Iridium. That's going to be a kind of more drum and bassy, dub reggae kind of vibe. It's a 4-track offering on vinyls, 12-inch I think we're doing. Yeah, super excited about that. Vinyl is my favourite medium, I think, for music, delivering music. It's just so visceral and, you know, you can hold it in your hands and you can read about the artists, and there's just something so pleasurable about that physical experience with music. Such an intangible thing, isn't it?
We've got you through July. Is there anything else that's
yes, and low techno stuff in the latter half. And I think it's hard to know, Meg. I mean, what's going to happen to us all? Fascism is creeping. Climate change is threatening. My last gig was in 45-degree heat in the middle of summer, and none of my gear worked. We all just sat around drinking cold drinks and wondering how we're going to be able to put on gigs in the future. In summer, because of the heat, we thought maybe we would start doing work time at night and sleeping during the day so that we can then actually have some leisure time again.
Right.
It's that hot in summer here. Really, it's just a nightmare. So I don't know, Meg, what is any of us going to do when climate change becomes an issue that we can't ignore anymore?
Right, yeah.
It's so hard to make plans beyond July.
It is. And especially for musicians, just making plans at all right now when the safety...
With the pandemic. We didn't even talk about the pandemic.
There's just too much disaster happening at once to talk about it all. It's... Let's go back to that uplifting moment where, you know, we take our ecstasy for the first time and we accept our mixes for what they are.
Totally. I mean, I think ecstasy is having a resurgence as well by the looks of things. I mean, I feel like we're having a full-fledged 90s resurgence right now. The drugs, the culture, everything in music, especially electronic music, seems to be pushing towards that. And I just love breakbeat. Oh, wow. Breakbeat is coming back.
Well, I think things have gotten so dire. There's that desire for the vibe in the 90s, especially rave culture, of, like you said, like hope for the future and just relief from oppressive forces. Yeah, it makes sense that it's having a resurgence.
With that in mind, I would like you to get out your whistle, put on a flannel hat and your feeler sneakers, put on your baggy trousers and a nice oversized T-shirt with your favourite band or whatever written on it. Get out the muesli and the Nirvana.
Yes. See, that's what I love about that is, like, the clothing was just so baggy. Like, you didn't have to, like, it was so comfortable, you know?
It was so comfortable. Let's do that again, Meg.
Let's just be comfortable.
Let's revive the look.
I am down for it.
I'll send you a pic to put up on your podcast of me and my baggies.
I would treasure that. And the rest of the listeners, we are down for that. All right. Well, on that note, Sophie, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a really, I don't know, for me, just like cathartic discussion. And I feel better about myself now. So thank you.
Good. Thank you so much for having me, Meg. It's been a really nourishing discussion.
Oh, I'm so glad.